Elsa Auerbach was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but her story actually begins before that. Elsa's parents were Jewish refugees from Hitler's Third Reich and escaped Germany before World War II broke out and before the United States installed the anti-immigration laws. Elsa's life was heavily influenced from the intolerance of the Nazis, and her family was always anti-racist, always more than willing to take action to break the walls of segregation.
To have somebody to do childcare, and somehow or other, they ended up hiring a young woman who was 19 years old, who was African American, and she was the first African American woman to be admitted to the University of Michigan.
Elsa would spend the next 3 years under the care of this woman, and this experience was formative for Elsa, as it impelled her to take an active part in her community in fighting for justice.
At the age of 12, there was a store called Marty Walker that was a women's clothing store in Ann Arbor, which is where the University of Michigan is. And that store would not allow black people to try on clothes because they thought they were going to get the clothes dirty or something like that. And so at the age of 12, I joined a protest march around the store, and I think that much of what happened in my life after that was really influenced by those experiences.
The protest was successful, and the store no longer stopped African American patrons from trying on the clothes. Elsa was in college at the time of the Vietnam War, but was never involved in any of the anti-war protests. While she was taking an Africa Studies course, the Sharpeville Massacre occurred. The event was so shocking that Elsa began to pay more attention to South Africa than the United States. In graduate school, Elsa joined the Africa Research Group, where she co-authored the book Race to Power, among other works. Even 10 years after the end of apartheid, Elsa is still invited to the nation to celebrate that momentous day.
I was particularly interested in the way that the U.S. government and U.S. corporations supported the government of South Africa and allowed apartheid to continue to exist because it was profitable for American companies.
The American government on the surface was against apartheid, but in reality, the government and many private companies profited from the apartheid government rule. There were many resources to be taken advantage of in Africa, such as diamonds and gold in South Africa and oil in Angola. Eventually, the United States passed the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which halted all investment, loans, and trade with South Africa. Though this helped end the apartheid government, Elsa maintains that it was the people of South Africa that had the biggest influence. After the end of South African apartheid, Elsa graduated with her PhD in English and worked in an auto factory owned by General Motors in Framingham. Her intent was to organize the immigrant workers to push for fair treatment and to get the benefits of the workers' unions. But her efforts and those of her organization were entirely unsuccessful.
The company liked to hire immigrants because immigrants often were worried about their jobs, and so they would work especially hard, and they weren't part of the tradition of the labor unions in the United States, although they were in their own countries. But I think because of being immigrants, they felt vulnerable, and so they were often not for example, the company would make them, when the company wanted to speed up the line, they would take a Portuguese worker and combine two jobs and make the Portuguese worker do the work. And the Portuguese workers would often not necessarily complain about it because they were afraid to.
Through those activities, Elsa realized that what immigrants needed the most was to know how to communicate. Elsa eventually decided to help immigrants by teaching them English so they would be better equipped to achieve life to its fullest potential, handle abusive cases, and know their rights as American citizens. And she's been doing that for more than 30 years. During those years, she published multiple books and papers dealing with English in society. But after all that Elsa has done for immigrants and the underprivileged, the most relevant act of kindness she had done was help my parents immigrate to the United States. Elsa met my grandmother back in 1983, when my grandmother was a visiting scholar to the English department of UMass. Unfortunately, her Cambridge apartment had a fire, and she lost most of her possessions and had nowhere to stay. Elsa opened her door to my grandmother, offered a place to stay until my grandmother returned to China. 3 years later, Elsa sponsored my father to come to UMass. In 1987, they again sponsored my mother to come join my father to study in UMass. If it weren't for Elsa, my parents may